stand up. And I looked in the skies and I could see thunder and lightning. I could see the lightning flash in all directions and hear the thunder. This guy sat down immediately, and something overwhelmed at that campsite. And I just said, thank you. Thank you. I said, thank you, Lord. Well, this individual showed up, decided he wasn't going to hang out very long, and he left. The very next day, Bob and I returned to the beach, and we talked about what was next for me in my future. When we returned, there was more activity in this little town. Other people from Seattle and other parts of the states were in town. You could tell by their license plates and the way they would pronounce their presence at not only the restaurants but other locations around town. And I prayed and I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to leave and continue on this adventure. So Bob, Jolene, and I sat and held hands. And we asked the Lord to not only bless our futures, but to guide us, and that we can give you glory for everything that we do or that you allow us to do in your name. And that I would be a vessel from that moment forward to be used in whatever way that he seemed my future should be used with. I said goodbye to Bob and Jolene, and I started driving. I drove for 7 hours. Not quite sure, I didn't even have a map. I just kept on driving. I wanted to get as far away from that small community as I could. Lo and behold, I ended up on a reservation, roughly 200 miles away from Vancouver, in the Okanagan country, they call it. It's kind of a desert area with orchards, a few rivers, but primarily sage and that dry environment like you'd find in eastern Washington. And I'm driving along this one portion of the reservation. I see the sign for another B&B. And I had cash in my pocket, and I thought, well, maybe I could stay under the radar for a little while. Check into the B&B and find maybe inspiration to start writing about my story. Because it was incredible. I had to share this information. I also had to follow through with what the cowboy told me to do. Tell people your story. Tell people the truth about Jesus Christ. So I remember driving to the head of this B&B, and it was tranquil because they were shedding cottonwood trees, and there was a thin layer of this mist. And this was truly in the desert, and it seemed like there was an oasis because everything was lush green, and they had these wonderful rose bushes that went 20 feet in length next to the B&B, and there were hummingbirds, dozens of hummingbirds on these 3 great feeders. And I'm looking around thinking, what a beautiful place this is. This is truly an oasis. Man, thank you, Lord. I walk up and I knock on the front door, and the owner comes out. He said, I'm sorry, we forgot to put the full sign up at the head of the driveway. We have no room for you. And I looked at him in the eyes, and I thought, you're a Christian, aren't you? You're a Catholic. You're a Catholic man. And he looked at me. And he said, yes, both myself and my wife are Eucharistic ministers in the church. How can you tell? And I looked at him and I said, I don't understand why I'm here, but I believe the Holy Spirit brought me here for a purpose. Does that mean anything to you? And he cocked his head at me, and he went back inside. He said, hold on, before he went back in. He said, I want to talk to my wife about this. And he comes back out, and he says, well, I'm sorry, we don't have room for you. You're going to have to find someplace else. And I said, well, how about I sleep in my car until a room opens up, because I don't think I should leave your property, because I know it's not by accident that I'm here. And so he goes, okay, hold on. He went back inside, came out, and he said, well, we do have room. Unfortunately, our next door neighbor is very ill, and he might not make it through the night. He's on his deathbed. And we feel uncomfortable if something would happen to him throughout the night. We wouldn't want to have you inconvenienced. And I said bluntly, I said, well, here, I'll help out with the body if he does pass, but I think he's going to make it through this night. And we'll talk more in the morning about why I believe the Lord guided me here. So they agreed, they allowed me to stay. The next morning I wake up to see I wake up to see Casey and Lillian and this older gentleman named Charlie. Charlie was the man that was close to death. He so happened to be the medicine man throughout the reservation land. And he hadn't eaten much in the last 7 days because he was suffering with lung cancer. And he was accepting death. And I remember looking into his eyes and seeing a glimmer of life. And I had a strange sense of humor at times, thinking, well, I'm not sure how much time I've got. Well, I'm not sure how much he's got either. But maybe I could help him out in some way. And that triggered something. I remember before I left, my mother gave me a prayer for me to read whenever I could. And it was in her handwriting. And the prayer was kind of an offshoot from one of Paul's letters in the Ephesians. And it stated about the height and the depth and the width of the love of Christ. Beyond all understanding. And I read this. And it was very moving for me because I could see my mother's handwriting. Well, Charlie looked at me strange and he said, hold on a second. He went to Lillian. Lillian, I'd like some food and some water. I'd like to get to know this man a little bit more. Casey looked at me and I looked at Casey, and for the next 2 hours I engaged a conversation with Charlie. 3 days later, he was well enough to move back into his own house about a block and a half away. No one could believe it. But a strange thing happened. He called me over to his house. He said, Joe, I'm very pleased that you came into my life when you did. But there's a reason that I want to share with you. He goes, I know a little bit about Christ. I've read the Bible, but I'm a Native American and we practice our own relationship. But we have visions. Do you know what visions are? And I've read about great visions from the Bible. And I've had some extraordinary dreams up to that point. And he said, 5 years ago, I was being taught by the old shaman. And he used to have these great visions. Well, the last vision he told me about was about my own death. And this is what really piqued my attention when he went to grab that prayer for your mom. Because this gentleman told me when it was close to my death, a white man would come into my life and help me. And I, in turn, was going to help him. And 5 years later, it's true. And I looked at Charlie and I said, well, Charlie, did you make that story up? Because I believe that the Lord I worship guided me here for this purpose. And he said, Joe, I could never forget that story because when he told me a white man would help me, I was taken back because I've never liked white people for what they've done to my people. But when I saw you and you read